Donald Trump and the art of deal-making. The U.S. president has signed record-breaking agreements during his state visit to Qatar. It's part of a three-nation tour of the region, a trip that's now expected to fetch America billions in new investments. But what do the Gulf states gain from this trip? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. Even before he flew to the Gulf, the focus in American media was on the billions of dollars of new investments Donald Trump was eyeing. The U.S. president has since signed mega deals, making his America First goal as much a part of economic strategy as foreign policy. One of the biggest was in Qatar, where Boeing secured its largest ever order of wide-body jets from Qatar Airways. Doha also promised to invest more than $10 billion in the Udeid air base, one of America's biggest military facilities in the world. Trump says he's forging a future with the Middle East defined by commerce, not chaos. But does it mean regional stability and security are now taking a back seat? And how likely is it that the U.S. president would throw America's weight behind ending the devastating war in Gaza? We'll get to our guests in a moment. First, this report from Imogen Kimber.
He's the first U.S. president to make a state visit to Qatar, an opportunity to sign deals and increase economic and political cooperation. Donald Trump arrived in Doha from Saudi Arabia, where he began his three-nation tour of the Gulf.
We discussed many issues, our great bilateral relationship and also the situation in the region. Of course, I think after signing these documents, we are going to another level of relationship between Qatar and the United States.
I just want to thank you. We've been friends for a long time, long before politics. We're going to help each other. The United States is in a very strong position militarily. We have the best equipment anywhere in the world. You're buying a lot of that equipment, actually.
Billed as the biggest ever order, Qatar is purchasing 160 Boeing commercial jets, with the possibility for 50 more.
Well, that's a record, Kelly, and congratulations to Boeing.
With more deals in the defence sector and a list of agreements between Qatar and US energy companies that, according to the White House, is worth at least $1.2 trillion. Iran's nuclear program was also on the table, with Trump looking to Qatar to use its influence in diplomatic efforts.
You're also working with us very closely with respect to negotiating a deal with Iran, which is the far friendlier course that you would see. I mean, we have two courses. There's only two courses. There aren't three or four or five. There's two. There's a friendly and a non-friendly. And the non-friendly is a violent course, and I don't want that. I'll say it up front. I don't want that. But they have to get moving.
The Emir of Qatar appealed to Trump to help stop the genocide in Gaza.
Mr. President, your involvement could catalyze a breakthrough where others have stalled, but only if done in concert with serious partners. Qatar brings the channels, the access, and the credibility. The United States brings power, leverage, and global weight. If we act together, we have a real shot at ending the bloodshed and restoring regional confidence.
They also talked about the conflict in Ukraine, Yemen, and Syria. The US's influence looms large in the region, so these talks could be a major factor in regional stability. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Okay, let's now bring in our guest. Joining us from Doha is Faisal Al-Mdahka, who's the editor-in-chief of the Gulf Times. It's a local newspaper here in Qatar. In London, Andreas Krieg, who's a senior lecturer at King's College London School of Security Studies. Also in Doha, Paul Musgrave, who's an associate professor of government at Georgetown University in Qatar. Thanks for your time, and thanks for joining us on Inside Story. Mr. Faisal, over to you first. Look, Trump's visit is the first to Qatar by a sitting U.S. president since 2003. For you, what was the takeaway message from his visit?
Well, this visit is a result of a long diplomacy and a bilateral an agreement between Qatar and the U.S. And of course, it represents a lot of trust and, and more strategic alliance. So if you think about what we have done together, we have, with the U.S., for example, spoke about the Taliban, long time hosting them here in Qatar and facilitating all the mediation. And that resulted to end of a long war that even President Trump was talking about, that it was unnecessary war. And then we logistically, we helped the U.S. Moving the troops and moving even the embassy of Afghanistan was operating from Qatar. So, we really have a big trust on the U.S. They have a big trust on us, and we have a strategic ally with them. And the hydrocarbon business, one of the biggest projects that has been invested in Qatar by American companies. Right. Most of our airlines are, from Boeing. We have a cultural relationship. We are helping the U.S. also in the World Cup. There is a lot of legacy that is happening in Qatar, and we have passed it. So I think it's a success to the Qatar diplomacy, led by His Highness, the Prime Minister. Long hour of mediation. We have freed American hostage, and we will continue to do our role. And our main role really is to have a peaceful, sustainable region that is. Remember, Dareen, that this region has 2/3 of the population are youth.
Right.
They are looking.
Okay, let me just jump in there. Look, you've mentioned a number of topics, which we're going to get into throughout the program. But Andreas, over to you. Look, for Qatar, not only Qatar, in fact, but other countries in the Gulf region, one of the key things is ensuring their security. Donald Trump said it when he was here. He said, "We will protect you." And I'm quoting. How significant is that for Qatar?
It is very significant. I think we're all forgetting how 8 years ago there was a summit in Riyadh in 2017 where Qatar was attending, but that was kind of amid a prelude to a blockade run by UAE and Saudi against Qatar, where Qatar was somewhat ostracized afterwards. And, the blockade almost took 3 years to resolve. And Trump at the time was not very convinced of the Gulf. He didn't really know what to expect. And obviously now, 8 years later, it's a 180-degree shift. We have a united Gulf. Qatar is very much in the driver's seat of all of that. But after all, it's an insecure environment, and the geography of this place, as you know, is one which remains insecure. But there's hope at the horizon that a new U.S. foreign and security policy, which is not based on a neoconservative approach to military might and material power, but one that looks at negotiation, mediation, brokerage, interconnectivity, and interdependence, is one that will bring more stability. And I think it's also quite telling that what we've seen here is a new Gulf and a new regional order run by the United States, where Iran potentially is part of it, where the Gulf states are part of it, and where Israel under Netanyahu seems to be somewhat ostracized, while 8 years ago it was the other way around. Trump was trying to build an order where Israel was the center point and everyone else had to cater towards Israel. I think it's very much a shift of the regional center of gravity to the Gulf. And the US is willing to underwrite security and stability there, but also expects these regional actors, Qatar, Saudi, and the UAE, to take over responsibility themselves as well to provide stability in the region.
Paul, Trump capped his visit to Qatar with a speech to U.S. soldiers. He visited Udeid, the largest military airbase in the region. But what was behind his message, do you think? It did feel at some parts like it was part of a campaign rally. But what's the message that he's sending out by visiting this particular base?
Well, the military is a very, very friendly room for any U.S. president to visit. And for Trump in particular, this was a way to cap off his visit to Qatar, a country that isn't always popular in the United States, and he's received some criticism even during this trip. And it was a way for him to literally wrap himself in the flag, reassert America's image, and also show himself to be, playing with and supporting the interests of a key constituency of his, the military and folks who are in favor of this. And I think that it underscored that for President Trump, the message here was in many ways about making this the America First tour. And part of that was working with local partners and allies. Part of this, as Andreas said, was to make sure that the Israelis and the Iranians both got the message that there's going to be a new, different U.S. policy to the Middle East. But I think the optics of this, Trump dancing along to God Bless the USA, that song by Lee Greenwood, in front of an American drone, in front of the flag, that was a way for him to show that this is still the United States, this is still a Trump administration that is going to make sure that strength and the image of strength is at the core of its policy.
Faisal, there were some big deals that were signed in Qatar, weren't there? I mean, there was the big Qatar, the Boeing deal. The Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also signed defense deals and economic agreements. The White House put out a statement saying that Trump and Qatar's emir signed agreements would generate an economic exchange worth at least $1.2 trillion. How important are these deals, though, diplomatically, and how do they help to facilitate diplomatic engagement?
Sure. Actually, those deals, you listen to a lot of media platform they making it like, the Gulf is more throwing their money right and left. But let's go one by one. The Boeing deal I think it's a great deal for Qatar. Remember, President Trump have increased the tariff 2 weeks ago, and a lot of countries have backed up from getting the planes and freeze their orders. So it gives Qatar a very significant pathway to secure this big deals, because today, Qatar is not a startup airline or an airline is struggling. From Hamad Airport, you have 40 million passengers, and there is a very big demand and shortage on airplane, at least in Qatar Airways positioning. So, our people is also smart on grabbing opportunities, and I think the Boeing deal is a perfect example of this, and how this can, help both ways. I did my last study that Qatar Airways or Boeing deals have created 500,000 direct job in America. Mm-hmm. So it's both, we have the hydrocarbon business, but aviation is a very, very big deal in Qatar, and Qatar Airways is doing very well. So why not? And if this is and this is how trade, if it is good for both, it's good for both, and it's good for both economy.
Right.
Yeah.
Andreas, so there seemed to be kind of two tracks here, right? There was the economic and trade that Donald Trump was seeking, and then there was the political track that perhaps the Qatar was seeking. More than the U.S., because we heard from the Emir of Qatar, and he said he actually made a direct and public appeal to the U.S. president. He urged Trump to use his influence for a Gaza ceasefire and regional peace. I mean, that statement by Sheikh Tamim, does it lay out to you what should happen next?
Yeah, you're right. These are two sides of the same coin, the same mega coin, making America great again. One side is bringing investments, generating jobs in the United States, and that's where the Gulf can provide. And the other side is the geopolitical element of it, where the Gulf is taking over the burden of statecraft for the United States, effectively in Syria and Iran, when it comes to Yemen, when it comes to Gaza, you name it. But it's a give and take. It's a part of a transactional sort of doctrine, the MAGA doctrine. But that also means that Trump has now received an advance payment, if you will, by Qatar And it's now Qatar's turn to basically say, look, United States, look, Donald Trump, we expect you to do your bit, which is exercising pressure on Israel, on the Netanyahu government. Use your leverage to get us to a deal in Gaza. We are willing to mediate. And most Israelis want a deal. It's just the Netanyahu government that doesn't. And also when it comes to Syria, when it comes to Iran, we expect that the US is doing everything they can to get a deal off the ground, and Qatar will help where it can. But again, it's in the end of the day, it's up to the White House to kind of determine the framework and the boundaries of mediation. And that's, I think, something that Trump does very well. And now the hope, I think, in the Gulf is that you've been able to lure the White House, you've been able to lure Trump through these investments to say, look, these are players which are not good just for American industry, but they're also very good in shaping a new order for regional security and stability.
Paul, Andreas was referring to the leverage that the U.S. has on Israel, but what about the leverage that Gulf states have on the U.S.? Talk to us about that.
Well, there's a lot of links. I think we've talked a lot about the economic links, and those are truly impressive. Those include not just U.S. investments and U.S. Contracts in the hydrocarbon sector. They also include, obviously, the education sector, which is a big link between the two countries. There's a lot of investments that Qatar has made and that the Gulf states have made in the United States through things like the Qatar Investment Authority and through, in Saudi Arabia's case, the Public Investment Fund. Cumulatively, these amount to hundreds of billions, if not in the low trillions of dollars. And of course, rulers around the Gulf are racing to make that number higher. There's always some question about how many of these deals are truly new and how many of these are repackaged. But I think that there's no question that everybody wants to make these leverages, these linkages, as important as possible. And these also have.
But when it comes, I suppose, Paul, I mean, what I'm trying to ask you, though, is how much leverage do they have when it comes to Gaza, right? I hear what you're saying about the economic deals, because on Gaza, there's been no major announcement regarding a ceasefire or any sort of humanitarian aid. But Trump did say that he wants the U.S. to, quote unquote, take Gaza and turn it into a, quote, freedom zone. How do you read that?
Well, freedom zone is a little bit different from the Riviera of the Middle East, which was the February proposal. But you're absolutely right. President Trump has symbolically and in some cases actually backed away from Israel over the past few days. But the question is how much of this is going to translate into action on the questions about Israeli and Gazan security that are most important to the players and to people around the region and, of course, in Gaza itself. That's going to be difficult. I will say politically, one way that there is leverage is in 2024. President Trump did do better with Arab American voters than Republicans have done in a long time. So this is a constituency that he was involved in courting. He's more sympathetic in some ways than he certainly was during the first term. But we also have to remember that the pro-Israel, pro-Netanyahu government lobby in the United States really is actually quite influential. And one of the things that we're going to see in the next weeks and months is there's going to be, I suspect, a lot of overt and behind-the-scenes fighting over the implementation of many of these promises, not least of which, of course, includes the lifting of sanctions on Syria.
Okay, speaking of Syria, let's talk about that. Faisal, so this trip, as we're saying, has seen Trump getting investment, trade and defense deals. But when it comes to Syria, how would you assess the impact that his trip has had?
Look, Dareen, I think, continuing what we have talked about is the package between the economic and now politics. This influence, I think Syria is a very good example because it's a pilot of this new era of the young leaders in the Gulf. If you think about it, it is Sheikh Tamim, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Erdogan, and Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. So those four influenced a very crucial of lifting the sanction, which was the other route Israel was trying to create a war there. And now this is going to open an opportunity of economy. So this is a true example of leveraging and packaging economical deal with political influence. As His Highness said that we can provide channel and access, and America has the power to stop any war. And that's really a very good a pilot example, and it was a hot region. 2 weeks ago, Israel was bombing the palace of Syria. And you saw it by your eyes when President Trump announced it. You saw the cheer of the Arab population in the street of Damascus and other states. So
Right.
that's really a very good example. And it gives also a support, I think, for the deal in Gaza. I know there is no news, but maybe no news is good news. And I believe that there is something that should happen soon because, this cannot stay more than this.
Yeah, we will wait and see what happens when it comes to Gaza. But when it comes to Iran, Andreas, at the state dinner in Doha, Trump asked the Emir of Qatar for his help on Iran. What exactly is Trump asking the Qataris to do, and what role can Qatar play in the Iran file and the diplomatic talks going on?
Well, the Iran file is kind of where everyone is working towards. I think that's the key. If you broker that deal, that will really shift the trajectory of the region. And I think it's a complex deal to be had. I mean, on the one hand, you obviously have Qatar, who has very deep-seated relations with the U.S. administration, but at the same time has also a very deep relationship with what I call the deep state, with those people, the IRGC, not just the government in Iran, because they've been cooperating over the North Field for 30 years. There is a level of trust there, and the Iranians also know that the Qataris can provide something on the other end by having very trusted and deep relations and strategic depth in Washington. You have the Omanis. Obviously, the Omanis have a natural relationship with the Iranians, but what the Omanis are lacking is that sort of trusted relationship in Washington. So I think the Omanis are complementing the Qatari strategic depth in Washington. And then lastly, you have also the Saudis, who over the last 2 years have also normalized relations with Iran and have a very good institutional relationship with the Iranian institution. So all these three Gulf actors really need to work together, Qatar, Saudi, and Oman, in order to get this deal across the line. And I think what the Qataris are providing in that respect is potential incentives as well. Like we had in the JCPOA 2015, the previous Iran deal, Qatar offered the Iranians, after the lifting of sanctions, multi-billion-dollar investments into their hydrocarbon, mostly gas infrastructure. And I think there is a lot in there for Qatari businesses in Iran. I think it could be extremely lucrative for industry in Qatar. And I think that's something that the Iranians know about. And it's important that the Gulf states work together rather than trying to compete with one another over who's owning that file, because that file will not be owned by one single country in the Gulf.
Paul, I see you nodding along to what Andreas has to say. Do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things to understand the domestic U.S. politics about this is war in the U.S. public is actually relatively unpopular these days. One of the ways that President Trump differentiated himself back in 2016 was by running against the Iraq War of 2003. And I think that President Trump may be credible when he says that he doesn't want a war with Iran, but he's also very clearly using the threat of violence to get a deal. What stands out here is that he knows that he does need regional partners to help make that credible. There's also a way to use regional partners to do an end run around the hardliners in his own camp. But one of the other things that strikes me as ironic about all of this is, of course, that in many ways, President Trump was a strong critic of the JCPOA, the Obama-era nuclear deal, and here we are trying to see the U.S. broker something with the help of Qatar and other regional allies that looks a lot like the JCPOA, but is probably going to be less influential and will have greater breakout capacity for the Iranians.
Paul, I know you join us from Doha, but because you've mentioned sort of the domestic American audience, I wonder if you can just give us a sense of how Americans in the U.S. are viewing this trip.
Well, I would say that the last 72 hours in a lot of ways have, strangely enough, been some of the highest moments of the Trump administration so far. On the other hand, you are starting to hear rumblings of discontent because some of the moves that President Trump has made, for instance, meeting with President al-Shara of Syria, who is a former leader of al-Qaeda, which very unpopular in the United States. That has not gone over well. There's also, of course, a strong constituency, not just a lobby, but a constituency in favor of Israel, and some of those folks are very upset. And then, of course, the question about not just the purchase of Boeing airplanes, but the potential gift of an airplane, of a 747-800, by the Qatari government to the United States. That has become an issue of real controversy. So there have been a lot of high points, and President Trump is going to be able to point to this visit as bringing back a lot of economic wins, but there have also been some elements of discord that we might see be fanned into flames over the next few weeks.
Okay, Faisal, if you could sort of pinpoint one thing of what Qatar wants from the U.S., what would it be?
It's the power. As we said, the channel and access is available, and we want U.S. to take its part and to know who's their real friend. Just by Saudi trip and Qatar trip and UAE trip, what did the U.S. gain? Gained a lot of jobs, money, sustainability, and future. What do they gain from Israel? Tell me. Funding wars with taxpayer. So I think it's very clear message that the real player in the Middle East is the young leaders, the two-thirds of the population who are youth, who are looking for future, who are looking for sustainability, who's looking for peaceful life. And I think that's really the message. And I think President Trump is wide enough, and the American public have seen this in their own eyes.
Andreas, how would you define that relationship as it stands today between the Gulf countries and the U.S.? And how do you see it progressing over the next 4 years under his administration?
As I said before, I mean, the Gulf is the center of gravity of stability in the region and strategic foresight as well, comparatively to other countries. But I think it's very important that we understand one thing, especially in the MAGA world. It's important. What is important for MAGA people is what are you contributing to U.S. power? And I think the GCC countries are net contributors to U.S. power. Israel is a net consumer of U.S. power. So it consumes bandwidth, but it doesn't add anything. I think the Gulf countries are adding something, and that makes them indispensable because not only are they injecting cash and money, but they have a lobby, they have networks, they have influence in a way that they're willing to use for regional stability, and they're being pragmatic about it. And I think that is kind of the rethink in the MAGA crowd that we're seeing in the United States right now, where people are saying, actually, hold on a minute, why are we putting $4 billion a year into Israel when they're actually trying to drag us into conflicts all over the region, while the Gulf, on the other hand, are really trying to suck us out of that quagmire?
Okay, on that note, we'll have to leave it there. Faisal Al-Mudahki, Andreas Krieg, and Paul Musgrave, thank you so much for joining us on Inside Story on Al Jazeera. Thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Join the conversation on X. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. From myself and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.